So today I'm going to be showing off my battle barge, its weapon systems, and the logic and how it works. It has 4 different weapon systems. We have our main cannons, which fire at double the rate of the normal barge cannons. I don't have the auto aim on there, but I still managed to hit. We have our bomb bay artillery, which is short range, so it's not going to get anywhere close to that target. We have our recoil suppressed machine guns, which I also have the auto aim on off because it's a little bit more fun like that. And last but not least, the box cannon. Because sometimes it's fun to just bonk the snot out of your enemies. Got it. So now I'll talk about how the weapon systems work, and then get into the logic. So as you can see, whatever one is selected, it operates only that turret, and the rest of them stay stationary. I'm pressing R1 and L1 in order to go back and forth between them, and unfortunately I don't have any indicator lights or number panel on here because it is a max complexity build. That's why it's just a simple barge instead of a more fancy ship. It's just a more of a weapons demonstration platform than an actual weapons platform. Anyways, down here we've got our brains, but we don't have to worry about this one right at the moment because that's just the logic for this weapon here. This is our weapon selector logic, and I wish I could move my character out of the way, but I'm in build mode and that's just how they are. Anyways, this is the main weapon selector, the accumulator. It has our R1 and L1 on it. It's got a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 3, and it's set to use steps. So every time you press R1, it increases 1, which selects the next weapon up, and if you press L1, it'll select the next weapon, or the previous weapon that you had. And we have 4 weapon slots in total on this ship. And that goes into, that feeds along this row into these 4, I always want to call them equals gates, but they're comparison gates set to equals. And the first one has a threshold of 0, so that's our main cannon. It's active when you first spawn in. And threshold 1 is our bomb bay launcher. And as you can see, each of these ones in our top row activates the whole column below them, as well as this one on the side, but I'll get to that when we get to the box cannon. And then, over on this column, underneath our accumulator, are OR gates that are our inputs. We've got down, or up and down, we got X to fire, left and right. And again, all of these are selecting the whole row besides them. So if you've ever seen a spreadsheet like in Excel or something like that, it's set up a little bit like that. We've got our top corner, our main label, the labels of the top row, and the labels over here. And then this whole section is AND gates. So every time we have an intersection between an active weapon and an active input, that's when it finally does something to our AND gate. So it can never, pressing up on this pad, even though it's attached to all 4 of these logics, will only activate one at a time because our accumulator can only have one value at a time. So therefore only one comparison gate can be active at a time, and it keeps it all our systems separated. And it's easy enough to click through them, and this way we don't run out of buttons on the controller. Because normally if you have 3 weapons, you'd have like X, R1, and L1 be your 3 different firing buttons for them. But if you want a 4th button, or a 4th weapon, then you start to run out of buttons. And I've got a tank that has, I think, a 7 selector panel, because it also has a couple of sound effects and flares. So what I'm saying is this logic can be expanded upon or shrunk depending on your needs. If you've got more inputs that you need, say, if you want different drive settings, or different drive systems like a boat mode and a car mode, and have them activate different, you would just have different inputs or more inputs. And if you want more systems, you would just add more comparison gates and columns. Next we'll go over the weapons themselves and what makes them a little bit spicier than normal weapons. First we've got the doubled up cannons. They use a piston glitch to basically merge these 2 large cannons and make it seamlessly look like there's only one on there. But as you can see in build mode, it's 2. And one of them just has a delay of 1.5 seconds, because the reload time is 3, and that cuts it in half, and it gives the illusion of a single cannon that fires at double speed. Pretty simple, but if you don't know the piston glitch, it's just you set the start position to 0, you can have whatever speed you want, and that's it. And as long as it's one weld group adjacent to another weld group, they normally merge through all nice and happy. If you're making a much bigger thing, or if you're making something more complex, it can bug out a little bit, but that's just an issue of taming weld groups. I don't want to say skill issue, but practice makes perfect. Next up we have the Bombay Artillery, sponsored by Melvin's, like all of my Bombay Artilleries are. This one also uses pistons to make it work, but it's not using the piston glitch. We're using the speed trick, which is having them set to -100 and using a negative input in order to make them go much faster than they would in the positive direction, because the faster they go, the farther we can use them to throw the bombs. Now we've got the auto reset on, and start position 0. There doesn't need to be any delay or timings or anything on this, because the timings are all down here in this logic, and I'll get to that in just a second. Also up here we've got the Bombay itself, and it's very important to have the delay of 0.02. It's a very common delay when you're accelerating things with pistons, and if you don't do it, you'll blow yourself up. Pretty simple as that. But here's the brain for that weapon. We've got a couple of things going on here, but if this were a standalone weapon, the firing button, X, would be assigned to both this value and this value on the accumulator. Because each side here, I know it looks a little complex on first glance, but each side here is just the timings for each side of this cannon launcher. So it's just 6, normally 6 per Bombay launcher. If this were only one side, there would only be 6 logic gates here. But this one here is an OR gate, and it attaches just to the second accumulator with a delay of 0.12, which is about 1/8 of a second, so it staggers the bombs. So it staggers the bombs a little bit nicer than if it were to just go 1, 2, 3, 4. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the other block that we have here is a NOR gate, and that's attached to both our accumulators. And it's very important here because it's what resets our safety mechanism and allows you to shoot more than one time. It's set to -0.1 and feeds into both the accumulators. And both our accumulators are set to these values, which at first glance might seem arbitrary, and they're probably not the only values that work, but it took me a while to find a set of values that worked well for making it not blow your feet off. It's a scale of 60, a maximum of 4.4, and a minimum of 0. And that's the same on both of them. And so what this does is it keeps all of our timing circuit active for the entire duration, even if you only tap the button slightly. Because without the safety system, if you were just using the timings of the OR gates directly, if you were to let go too early, the bombs would keep coming out, but it wouldn't accelerate them and they would drop on your feet and you would explode. So our timings here are pretty simple, but there's a couple other things going on to mention. The output on all of them is -1, because the pistons, again, need to have a negative signal run through them in order to use our negative speed, extra fast enhancement. And it's okay to have the bomb bays also be triggered by a -1, because as far as I know, all the weapons can be triggered by a negative signal. I think that's true of anything that only has one input thingy for it. Yeah, like this only has a green input, not a red input, and I believe that's why a negative input will also turn it on. So each of these timings are an OR gate hooked up to both the pistons and the bomb bay. They have a duration of 0.1, because that's how long the you want it to pulse outward before it retracts and gets ready for the next throw. There's no delay on the first one, because our 0.02 that's necessary is already on the bomb bay. There's a delay of 0.27 for the second one, 0.51 for the third, and 0.77 for the last one. Again, these seem arbitrary, but these are even more important to have this way, because as far as I know, and from other people I've talked to, this is about the only timings that'll work and not blow you up. There might be like a 0.1 difference that you can squeak in here or there and not blow yourself up, but it's pretty tight, because the bombs don't come out of here perfectly in quarter-second intervals. They're askew like that. But it works. If you have all the numbers in like this, it'll work. Moving on, we're back to a more simple one. The recoil suppressed machine guns is just a piston glitch, and it's, I don't even believe, yeah, it's just the full setting of the rocket thruster is about enough to cancel out the recoil from a minigun. So it doesn't have to be piston glitched in, it's just for aesthetic reason and to make it a little bit harder for them to get shot off because there's block in front of them. But let me select them. You'll see it's not pushing us around much at all. We got up to 1 mile an hour, 2 miles an hour maybe. It cancels out most of the recoil with just a simple addition of a rocket thruster on the back, which is only a single complexity. And sure, power cores are explosive now, but that includes the gun anyways, so what's the worry? Just have it sink into blocks with the piston glitch, and it's a little harder to blow up. And last but not least, we've got our box cannon here. Now I'm going to switch back our view to the brain here, because you notice before that our box cannon circuit has one extra logic gate here. It's just an AND gate, the same as here, and it's just off to the side because a box cannon needs both a positive input and a negative input, unlike the bomb bay thrower. So the pistons, if I can, yep, the pistons here need the negative input, but if we had our negative input feed into the metal crate dispenser, it wouldn't produce a box, it would delete the last box, because this technically isn't a weapon block, and therefore it has two inputs, because you've got the shoot input and the one that will delete your boxes for you that no one ever uses. It's also important to know that it's not a delay of 0.02 on this, but a duration of 0.02 on the metal crate dispenser, and that's because it doesn't fire the box as soon as you press the button. When this receives an input, it begins charging, and when the input's released, it fires the metal crate. And on its own, that fires it at a decent little bonking speed. It's kind of funny. Sometimes it'll break some blocks, not very much nowadays especially. But by having it just 0.02, it's not really charging up at all, it's just creating a box. And all the momentum is coming from these three pistons here. This is what pushes the box out fast enough to fly all the way over to the carrier over there. And before our last damage update, the box cannon would basically vaporize anything it touched. But nowadays it's more of a half-baked comedic weapon. Maybe half to a third of the time it'll still break the enemy in half, but more often than not it just throws them around. Still very fun, and useful for other things. It can intercept missiles out of the air, for one. If you shoot boxes, it's kind of like flak, in a way. And there's some other uses for them. It's one of my favorite custom weapons, to be honest. But yeah. That's my battle barge. I'll link in the description my tutorials for both the bomb bay artillery and the box cannon, because I have separate tutorials on those that are more in-depth, and I'm not sure how well I have labeled this video, and if I'm not mistaken, both the tutorials have both spoken and text, so if you have trouble following my voice, it'll have stuff written out on the screen for all the values, and be a little bit easier to follow. And because I'm my own editor, hopefully if I do label everything correctly, I'll have cut this part out. Won't I? Anyways, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Comment if you have any questions and I'll do my best to answer them. And if you're still watching, here's another build that uses the same logic system in order to operate all its weapon systems and its sound effects, because this one, as you can see by the indicator panel on the back, if I get out and take a closer look at it anyways, as you can see by the indicator panel on the back, we've got 7 effects. We've got our main cannon, which is selected when you spawn in. We've got our machine gun, a box cannon, a bomb bay artillery, and then in the bottom row of lights we've got a horn, a chirping, meowing sound effect, which I use for a lot of things, and a flare. Now you would never have enough buttons on your controller to have all these different features. Well, I went to fire the main cannon, forgetting that I had broken it off when I exited the tank. You would never be able to have all the buttons for these features individually because you would have, let's say, X. You would have R1. You would have L1. You would have this is where it gets tricky, because we've got side to side already taken up, and down already taken up. And we've got left and right on the stick, and L1 and R1 already taken. So you would have up and down on the left stick to play with. I suppose you could switch the our forward and backwards onto the stick, War Thunder style, free up R1 or R2 and L2 for more features, but that would still only get you 2 more. That would get you the Bombay Artillery and the horn, but I still have the meow sound effect and a flare. So it uses the same manner of logic, although it's a little less organized in here, and there's a bunch more packed in the body of the tank, if I'm not mistaken, for running the Bombay Artillery and such. But yeah, same logic. There's our accumulator, R1 and L1, and this one goes from 0 to 6 for a total of 7 features, showing that you can expand it as far as you want, and it's really only limited by complexity, of course. This one's another maximum complexity build, and creativity. And if you wanted just sound effects and stuff, I suppose you could make it so that you have a whole army of sound effects. The accumulator goes from, well, I suppose you could set it negative 100 to 100 for like 201 different effects. I don't know. I'm sure there's a reason, or at least a desire to make something that wacky. Anyways, good old Trailmakers. Thanks for watching. Bye! プレイステーション